Hey, y'all, welcome back to the Dynamic Decisions podcast, where we explore the strategies that drive successful decision making in the world of business. Why? Because good conversations lead to good decisions. I am your host, Teasha Cable, CEO of C Model Data, and today we have an exceptional guest who brings over 20 years of experience in leadership, program management, and go to market strategy in the enterprise technology space. His name is Daniel. Daniel is the head of operations at Snapper, the most popular on-demand photography network in the world. So Daniel has a great track record of driving growth and operational effectiveness and strategic partnerships, and we are just so pumped to have him here today. Daniel, welcome. Tell us more about you and Snapper.
Hey, thanks, Teasha. So I've been with Snapper for about going on 2 years. My background, I think you talked about a little bit about it, but I've been in the tech space for over 20 years. I started out as a customer service rep, right? It was in the early .com days. My path was, how do I get in the door for these high growth businesses? And I increasingly expanded the area of what I can make a decision on until I'm in the C-suite at Snapper. So I've done a lot of customer facing roles, which I think gives me the empathy that I need to make sure that my operations are supporting the needs of my customers. And also I've done a lot of operations and analytics to make sure that I'm doing right by the business as well. That's a little bit about me. Anything you want me to dig into?
Yeah, matter of fact, when we were on our call, you said something. You said that roles in operations require a certain type of person, one who wants to build things that are enduring. Can you go a little bit deeper to talk about that?
So building enduring things, that's kind of a value of mine personally. I think when I'm thinking about the people that do the best work in operations, they're builders. And not to say that the accounting background isn't the right way or go to market or a strategy. All of those things have a place. For me, I think building implies execution, right? And you have to have somebody that wants to dig in.
Yes.
And the components of execution are like, okay, do you have a good sense of the stack that you're dealing with, right? Do you have operational awareness? Do you know how to kind of execute it at what pace? So the builders not only focus on execution, but like they extract joy from the actual building of the work, right? Like that's the fun part. So for me, I think that's just how I operate as a person. I'm a whole human being. I'm not just an operator. So like even in like, art, for example, I'll do like collage, for example. And a lot of that is building a supply of things, trying to figure out what story do I want to tell, and then, kind of stack it all up. So I think a lot of it is building, and it's, creative for me.
I'm building something. I want to stay here in this space, but I want to transition it back to like thinking about a business operations, decision forward context. So I would love to know some of your insights on how developing a clear vision of success along with systems and governance can actually create transparency and accountability within an organization. Are there any decisions that you believe to be pivotal in building this kind of environment?
So that's a big question. I think there are a couple of things I want to latch on to. I think when we're building, there is the change management itself, which requires a lot of governance, and the kind of the components of governance, I think in my mind, are the methodology for decision making and then the operating rhythms to support decision making. Are they at what level, and then what level of rigor do you have? So I'm a big believer in operating rhythms. Within the context of decision-making frameworks, a lot of it is about, we're thinking about like strategy and execution. A lot of it is what you don't do, because you could be distracted by anything. Like the surface area of problems that you could be working on is like infinite. So I think the big decision is, what are you not doing? And then the other side of it is where your big bets are. Um, I think that's a pretty high level discussion or like a high level way of thinking about it.
Can you talk a little bit more about the operating rhythms? A little more detail there would be great, I think, for this audience.
I'm not going to say that I have all of the operating rhythms that I currently need in different levels of maturity, different businesses. I've had more robust operating rhythms, and that's going to be dependent on how mature, what specialization that we have. So, just for a little context, I'm in a Series B company, right?
Mhm.
But we have a relatively large staff for a Series B company. We have about like 300 people. So the operating rhythms that I have probably is not what I need at the time, right? Currently. So a lot of what I think is what I rely on is for the weekly leadership meetings that I have.
Mhm.
And then we have a quarterly portfolio review. And that's when we kind of decide what is going to go in and out. And then we have the normal periodic or kind of project syncs once we figure out what's going to be in those work streams. The way that I'm trying to manage the operating rhythms right now are there's two modes. One is what's happening with the KPIs, right?
Yeah.
And then
Gotta have the numbers. Yeah.
right, do I have numbers? And the other bit is what's happening with change management, right? And those have a lot more volatility than I currently would prefer, and that's because we don't really have a whole lot of, like, at least currently, like, the project management resources. So I am, like, skilling up managers to think like program managers when they're and primarily operators. So that's the leap. Organizations, when I had the benefit of more specialization, then you have, kind of the specific operations team that owns operating rhythms, right? So they own the agenda, they own pulling together all of the metrics and milestones and, all the consistent red, yellow, green and decisions to be made. So depending on the maturity of the organization, I'm thinking about what decisions do we need to make? Are we unblocking things?
Yeah. Is this hard? Like, is this, do you find that there are added complexities, unexpected elements that complicate getting this done? Or is this an easier part of running the business?
So I would split the operating rhythms into kind of the readouts on the metrics and then the change management focused work. There's a lot of volatility in the metric stuff again, depending on like, are you still in the firefighting mode or are you in optimization mode? Right. And that firefighting mode, or there's another variety of it, which is build mode, right? And so all of the varieties of collisions and change management kind of friction, and then the KPI stuff, right? Like just kind of the reading of the news or kind of the readouts. That should be every business's bread and butter. But I think the way that you manage that is kind of strict protocols about how do you like what are you going to bring to the meeting? Does everyone have a clear picture of what red, yellow, and green means per metric? Are you expected to have a mitigation plan ahead of time? And if you're not there, what is our protocol for decision making? But yeah, I think that kind of stuff is relatively straightforward, but I think you probably need to see what good looks like. Otherwise, you could just have a round table of leaders in the room and all of them would just kind of like take turns and not necessarily communicate what needs to focusing on.
One thing that I heard you say that I think is really important for the audience is really you described a capability maturity model at one point because you said, depending upon are we firefighting or are we doing this thing, if we look across all the things we're doing and go, where should we be at this stage of our growth or at this stage of us operationalizing a thing, right? If sometimes you're at optimization stages and sometimes you're at ad hoc stages,
Yep.
right? So being clear about where you are in a process, I think makes a big difference on what your expectations are on how good or bad something is actually working,
Oh yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super important. The reason why I think that's important, not just for leveling what is expected, right, and like where we are and where we're going, because that clarity is also helpful. But I think in a room where you have a bunch of different leaders, if we're all not clear on what the level of elevation or level of operational maturity we're at, some people will be more or less forthcoming about what the problems they have. There'll be well, that team is doing well. I'm not going to bring it up. I mean, it becomes like it creates like a better foundation for like the psychological safety you have to do or have to communicate risk and problems. So I have to remind people in the leadership meetings, like we are building over here and we are on fire over here and no one's to blame, or we're growing faster than we need to because the demand came in from this way and we weren't planning for it. So a lot of the maturity stuff is good for vision, but is also good for just everyone being clear on why there's a difference. Because people are, operations, all of that, and leaders, we're all still humans. We're all comparing ourselves to others. And I have a lot of new leaders. So giving folks the tools to not just plan, but just like give themselves perspective is very, very important.
Yeah, it's almost like you can use that to create a common language too, and a shared sense of mission when you communicate like that, which I think is really important for the workplace of today. I want to shift a little bit and ask you about how you approach high stakes decisions. Let's focus on operational decisions when you don't have all the information. So, how do you approach those?
A framework that I like to use and I recommend to my team is the reversibility framework. So there is the level of severity if something goes wrong, and the other axis is reversibility. And these are, again, with a lot of the cases is in the planning or change management mode. The idea is you get to, based on wherever you are in that quadrant, you figure out what is the level of risk mitigation that you need to take on. Because what I don't want people to do is be in default high risk mode and slow things down. I need execution and I need urgency. So I need people to be comfortable with moving fast.
How do you make them comfortable?
Yeah, so the framework of severity and reversibility gives people the framework to say like, okay, if things go wrong, the stakes are low and I could reverse it. So that means that just do it. But if the stakes are high, meaning the downsides are pretty steep and the reversibility is low, then I want more testing and more data. I want to slow down, either in executing on the decision or phasing out the period in which we could determine if we're on the right track. So in most cases, that's not the scenario we're dealing with. And so we have a lot of folks, and I feel like my job as a leader is to basically give my team enough context so they are comfortable with decision making. The problem I think that happens with high stakes decision making is that is going to be different for every level of the business. And I don't want everything to turn into an escalation. So
Yes.
what ends up happening is we have a lot of things funneled to a lot of go-to people when that's not necessary. So, I don't want leadership burnout. And so I have to like train people on feeling comfortable with making decisions.
I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate the concept of not everything becoming an escalation. Can you give us a little bit of your insight about how, like, maybe a specific way that one can make sure that that doesn't happen?
One tool that's been very effective for us has been just basic decision trees. When people are thinking about like policies and process, it's very easy to just put down the bullet points. And me as a leader, I'll have the machine in my head and I'll be like, this goes here, that goes there. And then fine. I said the words, and I put it on the whiteboard and then that gets translated in a bunch of bullet points and we get different folks come in and come out and different interpretations. And all of a sudden, the thing that we all agreed with on has decayed over time. And what I've worked on with decision trees specifically is what I'm trying to do with decision trees. And this is just like one technique or method is to create more consistency for a high quality decision at every level of the business. So what that means is decisions happen faster and we know what the exceptions are consistently and then what is the path for escalation. And so whereas before I could see two different bad scenarios of they're not sure what the decision is, so it just kind of stays in, I don't know what to do, or too much gets escalated at the wrong level. So and then it gets stuck in with the most busy people. So all of it is slow. And at the end of the day, it's impacting what we should be doing, which is delivering value to our customers. So I want decision to be quick, boring, basically.
How hard is this? How hard is this to do?
The decision tree process is pretty straightforward, right? Like if you once you see the model for it, it's just like if this happens, then go here, and then that happens, go there, and then you all have the end nodes. I've seen it done poorly. I've seen it done poorly where you see like they're trying to encompass an entire process with a single decision tree, and at that point, you're like looking at a London map. What are we doing here, right? So I think people confuse process mapping with decision trees. I want people to, there's a process. And in that process, there are certain points where we get to make a decision. That's the narrow focus of a decision tree. And then you should have very few nodes, right? And you know which ones are good and which ones are bad. So I think once people get the idea that process is different from decision, and then it kind of clicks, right? And then you kind of move along. And I think
Wait, before we leave here, so process is different from decisions. That means that I'm deciding ahead of process. Would you agree?
kind of here's my take. Decisions live in the context of the process. But from your perspective, it could also be like, what is the end goal? And then make sure that our process works within it, right? So I think both work. I think it depends on what part is breaking. Because sometimes your process is leading to a bad decision,
A bad outcome. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And then sometimes your process is fine, but you're just getting inconsistent outcomes because your decision making capabilities are poor.
That's right. Because what are you doing? How are you actually deciding what to do?
Yeah, and it does make things a little more boring because you're like, okay, I just have to do the thing. But like most things, I think should be boring, right? Like we should be putting energy into change and not into like the day to day stuff.
Yeah, and creating unique value for the company itself, right? So if we spend all our time making what could be a simple decision, or even too much time making complex decisions, then we don't spend any time building up a network of value for the organization. So, on that note, how do you actually track the outcomes of your decisions? Are there any KPIs or metrics that you find extremely revealing in terms of operational effectiveness?
I think it really depends on the decision. But overall, let's use this in the context of like support. And I think that's a very clear, that's where a lot of decision trees need to happen, right? Because like the customer facing role has the most surface area for, edge cases and all that kind of stuff, right? What that should produce, independent of the intent of the decision, what that should produce is a faster resolution time or shorter handle time. Um, so kind of what I'm observing. So I'm like looking at all of the decisions that we can be making, how many of them are ambiguous, and if they are ambiguous, that's creating this lag. If there's a lot of escalations, that's creating a different kind of lag, right? So I'm like, okay, the push is more decisions at a lower level at higher quality. So that should all kind of shrink the handle time. Then, depending on the nature of the decision, say for example, we want to improve our customer experience for some whatever process, right? Then you would have like the lagging indicator of I actually got a reduction in refunds, for example.
How do you help your team to actually understand what's leading and what's lagging based on what it is that you all do?
That's a tough one. I think it's I think it's I think it's easier as you kind of go up in levels in the business because you're kind of watching it at that level, and then you're in a room with the frontline folks and they're thinking about how does this map out with my incentives? How is this going to impact my compliance or kind of my QA score or whatever? So I do have to work on the team. This is what happens first, and this is the end goal. So I think the practice that we have is tends to be the project management framework, right? And you have to have some milestones that you track in the middle, and then you have eventually we're going to get to this thing because a lot of this stuff is going to be hard to measure. But I think in my mind, I start with the lagging, and then you work your way back into figuring out what is the right metric for you to determine whether you're on track or not. And then you have to kind of back into, okay, what is the right way to instrument the process so we could actually track that? Hopefully, you do have the mechanisms to do it, but I definitely start with the lagging goal.
That's good. In our case, a lot of times I like to think about the out. You start at the outcome, right? This is how we. What is it that we expect to happen, and then we can go backtrack and make the connections, the cause and effect connections all along the way. So let's go to our next little exercise. I am going to identify your decision making persona. So how this works is you get 100% to start with, and you have to end at you get 0 to 100% for every question. And I'm going to ask you, do you ask questions like this? And then after the question, you'll say 15, 20% of the time, whatever that number is. And then we'll just tally up to see what your decision making mix is. Okay.
Okay. How many questions am I going to get?
There are 4 questions in this section, and you will be able to, and for each question, you can go 0 to 100%, but you only get 100% total. Okay?
Okay. So I'll like, okay, that's a 20. That's
Yes.
another 20. And then okay.
Okay? And I will tell you what the persona is after you tell me the percentage.
Okay. Got it. Got it. All right.
And also, and there's no right or wrong, right? This is just you and kind of your decision making persona. So here's the first question. We're considering an operational change. How are we going to ensure it aligns with our core values and enhance our customer relationships?
That's, I think that's always the question. Uh, so even if, for example, like I'm working on something like margin, right? I still have to think about what my customer experience is going to be, right? Like it doesn't go away. But in my mind, like if I'm not thinking about the customer experience, I'm not doing good business.
What I'm really asking is, how does what we're going to do align with our core values and enhance customer relationships? So don't think about the question as just it's a way of asking a question. How often is that the question you're going to ask first, maybe, right? Like, does that resonate with you as your way of getting to the root?
Okay. So the answer is yes. I asked that question.
Okay. What's your percentage? How much of that is you?
Yeah, it's pretty up there. Like I might eat up like a lot of my
Eat
decision
it up.
making
Eat it
budget.
up. What you
All right,
got?
let's go. I'm gonna go big on that first question. I'm gonna say like 60. I would just go 60 on it.
60%. Okay.
I don't even
All
know what
right.
the other three are. They
I
get
know, that's good. So
maybe.
that one's called a feeler, by the way. So that's a feeler. A lot of gut emotion, a lot of expertise experience usually drives how feelers go, right? It's a feeler based persona. So let's get to the next one. We're reflecting on last year's operational initiatives. So what specific trends or insights have we uncovered that significantly influence our next strategic moves?
Uh, yeah, that does come up. So whenever we set goals, we have to work against a baseline. So it's important, but like I don't put a lot of energy into it because that's just how I operate. So I don't know. I'll give that a. I only gave myself like a 40%.
Yeah, you got 40% left so far.
That left. All right, cool. That's a biggie. I'll give it a 15.
Okay. Let's go to the next one. That one is called a planner. Here's your next one. We're evaluating our previous operational strategies. What key lessons have we learned that fundamentally change our decision making process?
I do that less. I mean, we do lessons learned, but it's not something that I pull out of the bag too much. Yeah, I'm not that guy. I let other people bring that up. That comes up very little.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll go, yeah.
5%?
Yeah, maybe 5. I'll say this, I'll create space for it, but I'm probably not driving that.
I mean, you can have 0 if you want. You want 0 on that one?
Yeah, I think I
Okay,
do.
cool, we'll put 0. Alright,
What's it?
here's the last one. That one's called a counter. We're
Huh.
just counting. We're counting up the cost, not counting,
Yeah.
looking backwards, counting, right? That's what
Yeah,
that is.
I'm a forward.
Okay, let's take a look at this one. As we formulate this new operational strategy, what specific data points are we going to rely on to validate our decisions?
Oh, yeah, like, so how much do I have left?
So you're at, I think you've got 30%,
Okay, 30%. That's
35%, I'm sorry.
cool. Yep, that's the
That's
rest.
it?
Yeah.
35%. Okay. That one is called the data driver. You know what's so interesting is actually you have 30%, I'm sorry. What I find is that most operational leaders heavy in that data driver, but the more experienced they are, heavy in the feeler area. So the goal is balanced decision making. And over time, shifts and changes. Not every bit of your persona is intended to stay the same. So the idea that you're some percentage feeler, some percentage planner, some percentage counter, you are actually not a counter. Which is okay because you actually lean more to the data driven place. Usually, people want to be a data driver, but they'll identify with what counting does relative to data, as opposed to actually looking holistically at data to help determine what should actually happen next. So it's really good that you have a mix or a balance. And I do think a little bit of counting in certain situations could be helpful and good.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that was great.
It just, I'm just trying to be honest with myself, and I don't do much of it.
I appreciate it because I think, like I said, we want to be certain things, right? We sometimes want our persona to look away. Everyone wants to say, I'm a data driver. I drive with data all the time, but some of us rely heavily on our gut and our feeling, and there's nothing wrong with that in the right context.
Yeah, let me reflect on that, because
Yeah.
I guess maybe it depends on when I create space for the counter. A lot of is when, and actually I probably do this more now because I don't have the expertise. I don't have all the answers. I'm getting a lot of my answers from the ground, right? So I ask it in a different way. I don't ask if there's lessons learned. I ask, is there anything I'm missing?
Mm.
Am I thinking about this correctly? And so and then that's when the history kind of comes up. You're like, oh, we've done this before, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, okay, cool. So I don't really frame it in terms of what lessons learned. I frame it as like, do I have the right context?
I think the context, and you mentioned context earlier, too. I think is a critical piece and is often missing. It's one of the reasons why the execution on strategy fails often is because people don't have enough context to do the things that they're being asked to do. So I like that you've highlighted that in both scenarios here. One is I want to make sure I give you enough context, and the second is tell me what I'm missing contextually to understand how we get the best outcome possible. So, Daniel, thank you so much. I wholly appreciate you participating in that exercise. I have one final question, but just before I give it to you, I want to thank the audience for being here. Thank you to the listeners. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully, you're finding this episode valuable. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate it, share it with your network, and keep the conversation going. Hashtag Dynamic Decisions Podcast, LinkedIn, Instagram, wherever you're at. We'd love for you to be talking about this particular podcast. And as we wrap up the conversation, I want to ask you to give this audience, give them one piece of advice. And I want you to think about the emerging leaders in this space, but then also apply this advice to the types of leaders that have been in this space for a really long time and really need to think about all the new and emerging things going on differently. What would you tell them? What piece of advice would you give them about their decision making right now?
About decision making, that the surface area that is so big.
It's big on purpose. Pick anything.
here's my take, and everyone is going to be coming into a problem space from a different trajectory, right? Like you might be the expert in the room, you might not have anything, you might not know what's going on, and you don't have the context. But here's how I think about it, regardless. I think create a space in which your decision making is collaborative, and goes up, down, and across, and you'll get the best results. I think, especially with the shrinking and consolidation of the space, like, in our in like B2B tech, right? We would have all of these different silos, and you have like sales come in, and then you go hand it off to the support and all that kind of stuff. All of that's, and then marketing's way over there, and product marketing is a whole different discipline. A lot of that stuff is getting crunched up, right? And so you have new roles where within this app oriented, high velocity end user world, your product manager is the growth marketer and the salesperson and support, and it's all happening like that. So, and it takes, it's going to be hard for you to have like that unicorn kind of brain to execute consistently. So I think find your allies, outsource the decision making to the right folks. So, who's your frontline folks, and have them be able to meet and go toe to toe with finance. And I think if you could facilitate that discussion and create allyship and partnership within those very disparate and distant organizations, then you all are going on that journey together, and you make better decisions. And it's also more fun building and all of this. And when making decisions are typically high stakes, so you also want to have some fun with it. And I think a lot of ways of thinking about it is not necessarily conflict, or maybe there are rightful and and good tensions. But I think my take on conflict is, the the best exit of conflict is you create more trust. And so, like, have fun, build trust, and yeah, and build together.
Like it. So collaborate, have fun, build trust, go up, down, and across, have allies, outsource decision making to the right folks, facilitate with your team, partner with your team. These are all excellent expert pieces of advice that I think keep in mind operational excellence and strategic execution all along the way. So thank you so much again, Daniel, for joining us. Would you tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and more about your company, more about Snapper?
Yeah, you could find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Oberes. And if you have any questions about this particular podcast or any other interviews that I've had out there, or my experience in general, feel free to message me. And you could find out more about Snapper at snappr.com.
Thank you again for being so insightful. And for our audience, thank you for tuning in. Remember, the best decisions come from great conversations. And if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, rate it, share it with your network. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. And until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading with purpose.